Disruptive security for destructive fintechs. How cybersecurity startups are making a difference. I'm happy to introduce you to Stav Pischits, founder at Cynance and co-founder at Scytale, who will introduce his panel. Stav, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me, guys? Hello. So thank you for coming to our panel. We're going to talk about cybersecurity and fintechs, and basically why cybersecurity is so critical for fintechs to strive, to exist, and to succeed in their industry. We have an incredible panel here. I will introduce the guys shortly. We have Sharjeel. Sharjeel, an entrepreneur, is the founder of Cykube. We have Vlad. Vlad works for Revolut, is a director of security in Revolut, responsible for threat intelligence in the bank. We have Karan Jain, a bank CTO or turned entrepreneur, actually several times. We have Meiran. Meiran, entrepreneur himself, is the founder and CEO of Scytale. And Jason Ozin from PAB Group is actually the group CISO. So for this panel, we're going to talk about some of the things that worries and concerns entrepreneurs and concerns fintechs when they work with large organizations, work with banks. Fintechs it's a different animal than incumbent players. Some fintechs are not sure about the requirements, what they need to do, where they need to be in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of the requirements. We'll try to share some light on what are the expectations. We'll look at it from the client side, we'll look at it from the fintech side, and we'll look at it from the angles that make sense and make security agile and flexible as possible. So without further ado, let's start with the first question. 1 second. Myself, okay. So yeah, Jason, right, thanks. So I started my professional career as a pen tester. I was basically hacking companies for a living, did many projects around the world for different organizations, then became a manager in EY, went through the ladder of corporate consulting, until one day I decided that I saw enough consulting and I can do it by myself. So I started my own consulting business called Cynance. A few years down the line, we have dozens of clients in the UK, around the world. And a year and a half ago, I started a new venture together with my amazing partners. We started CyberClub London is an initiative that comprises of 80 chief security officers from various organizations, various industries. Together, we meet with cybersecurity startups, really early stage startups, seed stage. We find the right startups, we find the most innovative technologies, we invest in them, then we support them, we help them with go-to-market, we help them with product market fit. So to be honest, I see pretty much security startups, and that's why I'm passionate about security startups. And you will discover, and again, some of you may know already, that there are so many commonalities between cybersecurity startups and fintech startups, and we'll discuss some of them today. Thank you, Jason. So, guys, when it comes to cybersecurity, what are the main areas that fintech should focus on? And we'll start from you, Jason, because you're the closest to me, and also you represent a senior figure within the procurement phase that any fintech needs to pass before they can actually work with a financial service institution.
Yeah, so what are the main areas fintechs focus on when it comes to cybersecurity? So security by design, number one, security by design from day one. Don't do it after the fact because you'll regret it. Agree a security framework, have a must-have list of security must-haves, PAM, MFA, asset management, change control, immutable backups, that's really important, a cyber incident response plan, DevSecOps, etc. Big asks on day one, but if you don't do it on day one, you're going to build in a legacy nightmare that you're going to regret on year 3.
Thank you, Jason. Now to you, Vlad. You work in the bank. Many fintechs want to work with Revolut, obviously. What are your requirements when you wear your security officer hat on?
Yeah, I'd say once it comes to security in fintech, it all depends on your level of maturity. So I like the phrasing that there is a proper, that there is the right solution for the right time. Obviously, once it comes to Revolut, we had a tremendous growth over the past years, and we're still expanding and growing. And same was the security function as well. To highlight a few key areas, it would be SDLC, DevSecOps, and generally building the security culture from scratch. I saw quite a few fintechs who first kind of ignore security because it's due to the question that are your security controls more expensive than the asset you're protecting? So sometimes they just ignore it and just outsource it. And then one day they start searching for the CISO or just a general security practitioner. And that's a whole nightmare if you come to some company which was outsourcing anything, and you need to build these mindsets, the stakeholder relationship, and so on. So I'd say from day one, focus on SDLC, DevSecOps, and third-party risk as well. Most of the fintechs are very much vendor-driven, so you need to take this into account. And most of the compromises nowadays, most of them, they involve third-party compromise, which are many examples of that.
Thank you, Vlad. Sharjeel, you are a 360 fintech person. What are your thoughts on security for fintechs?
First of all, Stav, FMLS, thank you for the invitation on a very well organized event. As some of you may know that I spent early part of my career in investment banking. Last few years, I took a sabbatical from the industry with a view to do more for the industry by bringing technology and banking together. And I think one thing which fintechs needs to understand, this is not only tech. This is 50% fin, in fact, 70% fin and only 30% tech. So if you're, as a financial institution, you are a financial institution. And as a financial institution, you are a trustee of clients' data and financial information. And if your data and information is not protected, this is one of the biggest mistakes any fintech can make. And I always recommend from very early in their journeys, we always recommend fintechs to start looking at on your data privacy and application security. Because if you don't, then you end up losing your credibility, and that is a regulatory risk. And that creates a financial stability risk, which, of course, regulators, they won't let you function. And then this is where, when it comes to the security from any fintech's perspective, we always advise the institutions and fintechs to start looking at security element very early in their stage. And it starts from your architectural design, and you need to start looking at it where you can see it might be a potential security risk. And of course, once you design your solution, your security code review, and of course your ongoing penetration testing and data audit, security audit is a vital element for fintechs.
Thank you, Sharjeel. Maybe before we continue to the next speaker, can you maybe share a bit more about what you actually do in Cykube and more about your experience? Because you mentioned you started investment banker, but how did you came all the way to entrepreneur? I asked if you can maybe just introduce yourself a bit better. Also, what do you do in Cykube, and how do you support fintechs these days?
It's a very good question. After spending 12, 15 years in investment banking, I came to the point for me, banking become very monotonous. And I think it's not only for me, for most of my colleagues who are in the industry, if you speak to them, there is no innovation. And I think the world we are living, if we don't adopt technology for banking especially, we will be left behind. And I can share it, 4 years back when I jumped into my technology journey, when I used to speak to friends and colleagues in the banking industry, that we are working on blockchain, we are working on fintech, we are working on cybersecurity. They used to say, "Oh no, Sharjeel, you are wasting your time." And after a couple of years, the same guys start contacting us that how can we work together? How can we embark on the journey? But I said to the guys, I said, "Listen, but you are not ready to work with fintechs." They said, "No, we are." And I think this is where now, and my journey I never looked back. Still, I receive phone calls that, why don't you come back to banking? I said, no, I think where I am, every day is a new challenge. When we work with the clients, when we work with FinTechs especially, one of the things which I have learned very early, the FinTechs, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes they don't realize the finance is a very important bit. Technology is not everything. And if you don't understand your product well, you cannot bring the right product to the market. And this is where my aspiration is we work with FinTechs not only on the technology side, we help them in product development, in financial product development, and then we help them in their software solution development. And in all this journey, always we keep them on the toes that, you need to work on cybersecurity. So for me, it's every day is a new challenge, and it gives me satisfaction, not only personally that I'm doing something which I like, but at the same time, you are sharing your experience, which most of the FinTechs, if you go to the market, they don't. Sharing your experience that how the investment banking works, how the banking works, and how they can be better. And instead of they do the same mistakes what we have done in the past, so they can start their journeys much better than our journeys.
Thank you, Sharjeel. Karan, before you answer the question, can you maybe speak a bit about what do you do these days in NayaOne?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stav. Thanks for having us, guys. So Karan, Jain, CEO for NayaOne. Where we sit into the ecosystem is we basically aggregate FinTechs and tech providers and help banks and financial service enterprise consume them as a product at 80% faster and cheaper. What we are is a FinTech infrastructure. And in terms of answering your question, and when working with FinTechs and in relation to cybersecurity in general, when we're working with FinTechs and working with them to work with the enterprise incumbents, the biggest thing where it gets caught up is compliance readiness as well as security readiness. And what we've seen, if you look at empirically in the last 5 years, FinTechs and banks started as a competition, and it very much became a partnership. That's been the biggest shift. And what we're seeing in terms of trends, in terms of activity we're seeing, over the next 3 to 5 years, partnerships are absolutely critical for financial service enterprise to get their product to market. Now, to get the product to market, they need to be working with different tech providers. But for those tech providers to be ready, their security needs to be ready and at a particular level. I think my colleagues have covered a lot of points, but I'll just add one more point. I think your security is important, but also how your security, and that's a gate opener, but how your security fits into the enterprise you're about to work with is also just as critical. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Karan. Thank you so much. Well, we'll move to the next question. So some FinTechs, they think that because they're too small, they don't really need to have all the security stack that large organizations need to have. I guess some of you heard this statement before. So I would like to hear your thoughts about it, because Karan, you were a CTO of a bank for many years, Jason, a group CISO. When you approach a new FinTech, let's say 5-people company, 7-people company, do you have any different expectations when you speak with them? Or maybe before you start, actually, you didn't tell us about yourself and about your organization, so maybe you start with a short intro and then answer the question. People can have a bit of more context about who you are and why you're here.
Yeah, I mean, there's no difference. There's no difference. At the end of the day, if someone wants to provide a product into us, or they expect us to provide a product into them, they're not going to give you a special pass into their organization, into their data, into their clients, into their security regime, because they're taking into account your size and your experience and how long you've been going or anything like that. It's a level playing field. And any company that does look at a startup and say, well, they're a startup, so, okay, they might not have 3 years worth of accounts, fine, but they've still got to have the fundamentals of security, the fundamentals of data protection, understand how they're going to work in a company that may not be as agile as themselves, and have to work with their change management, understand their timelines, things like that. So to me, there's no difference. And if a company wants a get out of jail free card because they're a startup, because they're new to the market, they're not going to get it.
Thank you, Jason. Meiran, in your business, Scytale, you support many FinTechs who want to work with large organizations. And when they need to align to some standards, SOC 2 or ISOs, they come to you for certifications. What are your notes on that?
So just a little bit about myself. I worked at EY for several years, and this is how I actually started doing audits, but not financial audits, more of a security audits. And today I'm focusing on fintech companies that, based on technologies, escorting them from day one when they need to navigate through all the security and compliance activities. It can start from ISO 27001, which is very popular in Europe. This is a global certification. SOC 2, which is, you can look at it as the equivalent in the United States market, but this is more or less the starting point. So everything that was discussed so far, actually, I've get to see this working with many startups in the fintech industry doing payments, financial transaction, and also it comes from day one when they're looking at selling to Revolut. In some cases, SOC 2 or ISO is going to be the starting point. That's what they're going to start in the first place. Implementation of infrastructure, DevSecOps, multi-factor authentication. I think all of that, it's super critical when you start a company, and you need to understand that you need to be in compliance actually from day one. Not only because this is your customer requirements, because it is, but eventually you want to close deals. And before that, you have regulations and law, and in some cases, legal commitments for your customers. So you need to balance between the business requirement and advancing the business to the compliance requirements. You need to find a common balance, but at the end of the day, the fintech industry is highly regulated. The risk is very high, and this is why it's so important to take the extra mile when it comes for working with big enterprise. It takes some time to build a reputation and only 5 minutes to ruin it. So you want to make sure that you do things right from day one.
Thank you so much. Vlad, would you like to address this question?
Yeah, so we see, so I agree with Jason's point in terms of all rules apply to everybody in terms of when a fintech or a cybersecurity company, no matter how young they are, working with a regulated entity. But what we've seen that some organizations walk into that relationship knowingly, where they're okay to work with a 5 to 7 person team, knowing that they're not going to hit everything, but they've got something unique or novel about their product that fits their kind of value chain, right? But they know they will need to work with that young team to get their product and their product to that level of maturity. That is typical, like a year or 2 year cycle. We also see that those organizations will take a level of investment. So it might be the venture building arm of the bank will get involved in that. So we do see that.
Thank you, Karan. Vlad, do you guys work a lot with fintech startups in Revolut?
Yeah. So I'd say we as a company, we have quite let's see, we're very much focused on efficiency. So literally every year we review the market, and if there is a more competitive offering, then we assess them. Sometimes it includes startups as well. I would say working with startup, it can be very plus for both sides. If the team is receptive, they actually, listen to the feedback and shaping their product roadmap according to the industry needs. Or sometimes it can be not such positive experience when, especially with all startups who initially derive from academia and founded by people without any, private sector experience. So, and it can be a mixed bag. It's like are they reinventing the bicycle or not? Yeah. So this is important. If you decide to work with a startup, to make sure that there is a connection between your function and the startup. Also, I would suggest having quite a prolonged POC stage. So make sure that you evaluated and assessed all the risks here. But generally, you can get a very good value for money. In our cases, sometimes you can even get kind of almost some of the things for free, right? Because startups are always looking for then more feedback. They're always looking for the industry insights, market insights, and they need those. So, and you can provide, as a company, you can provide this in return for the service. So I'd say, again, it's not without the risks, but definitely if you want to push the boundaries, if you don't want to be one of those super conservative, legacy-driven companies, then you need to look in the new technologies, in the new startups. You need to network. As in startups, that team is what's the most important. It's not even the technology; it's the team. It's what their vision, how strong it is. Also, it's beneficial to have when you have the relationship with the startup when it was small and then it grows, and you kind of, as a company, you might help to shape some of the requirements, some of the offering. That really forms a very stable bond. Which eventually, again, appears to be beneficial for you as a big corporate.
Thank you so much, Vlad. Now let's speak about your experience working with cybersecurity startups. Some of you are, again, represent a client side from a service organization. Karan, you run a fintech yourself, and you work with cyber startups. Vlad, you work with probably many cyber startups, same as Jason. And I'm keen to hear from you firsthand, how is it to work with a cyber startup? Somebody which is not the Palo Alto or Checkpoint of this world. They have less credibility. If they screw up, you need to answer more questions. The question is like, will this startup will be here next year or not? So some of these questions really worries a lot of fintechs when they're thinking of working with cybersecurity startups. And I'm just curious to hear from your side, how do you solve some of these questions and others that might rise due to the process when you evaluate a potential cybersecurity startups to work with when you wear your fintech hat on? So which of you want to start? Karan, go ahead.
So in terms of working with cybersecurity startups, I think you have two categories. One, closer. All right, thank you. With cybersecurity startups, you got two categories, right? One is as a technology provider, me buying the product directly from cybersecurity, and also cybersecurity companies that are selling into the banks. So the big difference still in the market is that the cybersecurity startups in the first 2 years is the level of maturity to be working with those companies. So even if you're selling to a fintech or a tech provider like myself, whose end customer is a bank or an enterprise, I still need to meet those standards. Now, to be able to be working with a younger company, I find that's still not there. Like usually when I work with them, they get to about it, and this is a generalization on the market, not applicable to everybody, but you get to about a 3-4 year mark where you've been through 1 or 2 customers, and I find the barrier for cybersecurity companies to enter that is higher, and there's a good reason for it. So if it was a lending product or if it was like a customer experience product, you can start working with anybody and you can refine your product. You can't screw up security. And so the posture of that cybersecurity company, the level of robustness of that product has to be there 9 out of 10 from day one. And I think just the overall, the product's good. Products are good, products are novel, but in order for those companies to be that level of maturity, I think there's still room to go. But I think it's coming up fast. It's not taking as long that the fintechs took to come up the curve.
Thank you, Karan. Jason?
So we've recently adopted a zero trust gateway product from an early stage startup. We didn't adopt it because they were an early stage startup. We adopted it because it ticked all our boxes. Our experience of working with them has been eye-opening and very, very positive because they're very agile. They really want to please. They're there for us. They're changing things on the fly. It's almost as if we are beta testing their product effectively. So it's been a really useful exercise. And maybe some people in my position may not have done that just because they were a startup, but everything else aligned. Their product was good. Everything worked for us. We helped them improve it. They added features for us, which they're then going to give to other clients as well, which I'm happy with. I haven't got a problem with that. I'm not going to try and get IP for that or anything like that. That's not an issue. And ultimately, I believe we got it cheap, which was also quite good. So my CEO's happy.
Thank you, Jason. But can you tell me how many bros were lifted or how many blockers you felt you went through in order to approve this vendor in your organization?
It's a good question. I would be the biggest blocker, so that was that one out of the way. But then you have obviously got to justify it to the board. And at the end of the day, I could only justify it to the board because the IT team said it was a good product and they wanted to work with it. So you had to get everybody else on board. If the IT team told me they weren't prepared to work with it or they saw problems with it, I wouldn't have got it any further. But then I also respect what they have to say. So that was my biggest gate opener, if you like. Once the IT team says, we like this product, we want it in our organization, and I liked it as well, then the board obviously did due diligence or the other stuff, but they came on board.
Thank you, Jason. Vlad, when you want to work with the new cybersecurity startup in Revolut, and Revolut is now pretty decent size organization, not a startup anymore, you can say. What are the arguments or the statements that you make to your superiors who might question you for working with a startup that is only 1.5 years old?
Well, it largely depends on once it comes to cybersecurity or intelligence, as in my case. It largely depends on the business appetite and how critical is this particular void you're trying to fill. Obviously, it's unlikely that you would onboard the immature startup to, say, do DLP protection or for cloud security, especially if you're a relatively large organization. So you don't want to innovate here. So no experiments. You just want this to be fixed. But once it comes to more experimental areas, so more to the added capacity, when you're trying to increase capacity somewhere, or when you have this a project and you're fine to, you want to kind of test the ground here, that's where it comes handy. But again, as I mentioned before, team is very important. It also depends on which level of maturity startup is. It's like Series A, Series B, Series C, who are investors. In some cases, some of the recommendations we get is through the investment funds who actually invest in the startups. So there are many, there are many variables here. I'd say it's very important again to network, to actually feel the team, what it's all about, to do the proper due diligence. That's really critical once it comes to the new businesses. Yeah, so I'd say that's.
Thank you, Vlad. Next question. There is a question which many people, maybe also here in the audience, think to themselves, but they don't have anyone to ask. So I will be their voice. How come that, on the one hand, you see all these incumbent cybersecurity players, Palo Alto, Checkpoint, Imperva, whatever. There are so many of them. There are so many. Market share is incredible. But then also you see so much innovation, so many cybersecurity startups that finding new ideas, finding new niches, and kind of how come it really happens? How come there are still places for innovation within the cybersecurity phase? So let's start with you, Sharjeel.
I think I would like to join this question with the last question. I think one of the biggest problem with industry is facing, either as fintech or cybersecurity startups, is education. So as an entrepreneur, I'm very passionate about my product. I understand, I know it. I know what problem I'm solving, and this is a genuine problem. But equally, in parallel, I'm building my team so quickly, and unfortunately, the lower end of the team or the sales force, they don't understand what you are selling. What exactly is your product? And I can tell you, working with, we are launching one of our own cybersecurity product, and we are working with a lot of various cybersecurity startups from literally just startup 6 months ago, and the startup who become one of the unicorns. And we have noticed throughout the knowledge, the education. piece is missing in most of the startups. They still cannot even explain properly, what their offering is. And I think this is where we always, find difficult and help even startups, that you need to bring your value proposition to the market in a consistent manner. And I think this is what is very important. And this literally we have seen make or break for some of these startups as well. So education, coordination internally, and take it to your product to the market in a right fashion is very, very important.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, I think it's a good point about that entrepreneurs sometimes, the startup founders, they solving this one problem and they're so passionate about it that they might miss the big picture sometimes. Well, for businesses, it might not be the biggest problem we have. So it might be a minor problem and we want to fix it. But we're not ready to, to just allocate all the resources or have all these extra functionalities. We just need to solve it at this level. So I'd say it's very important for the startup founders to actually talk to the real businesses and the crowd who actually works in the corporate, because there is a big difference between the business appetite, what can be done in the best case scenario, what's being done, and what we're going to do. It's way more complex rather than just that's the problem and that's the perfect solution. There are many more factors which influence the decisions. So I'd say, again, trying to be in touch with the industry real needs, not just based on some research or some reports, on the real problems of the real directors or managers or even analysts, right? It all goes from the bottom to the top in this sense. And that's really important. So for startups to engage in these, in the entities, in the forums, into the any sort of, or even with the advisory companies, which help them to understand the actual needs. I saw quite a few startups sitting in their own idea cage. When they're doing something, it's really cool. It can be a brilliant PhD work, and it really is good on paper, but we just don't need it at this level or in this form. Business needs different things sometimes. So staying in touch with reality, that would be the best advice here.
Thank you so much.
I want to add something. Being a CEO of a startup myself, that doing security compliance and supporting other startups, I get to see from internally within the company, getting requirement from enterprises, sending me these endless security questionnaires in which I need to follow. And then I also need to be in compliance with multiple security certification, regulations, attestation reports, or just frameworks that company wants to see that I'm in compliance with those frameworks. And in the beginning, as a startup, what you want to do, you want to build a great product, you want to sell, you want to get some customers, and you want to be out there in the market. And balancing all of these activities, it's tough. So you have to compromise. You have to prioritize what you're going to do first. So in the beginning, I would say prioritization and being laser focused on the product and the pain that you're trying to solve for your own customers. As long as you're going to bring more value, they will appreciate your service and your product, because eventually they have some pain that they want to solve. And you are the cure. You are the way that they can actually reduce the pain and work forward, promoting their business and eventually thrive. And what I'm seeing today in requirements from startups, if I'm going back to security audits, because companies will get some security audits. There are 3 types of security audit. It can be internal audit, that can be external audit. For example, a bank came to a customer and want to do their own audit, or a third-party audit like ISO 27001, PCI DSS, and etc. But what I see is a shifting from the traditional audit that being based on a yearly audit to a continuous audit, which means that technology, emerging technologies will actually be monitoring all of your systems on a daily basis. And then the auditor will get a real picture of what was going on throughout the year in your company. So you shouldn't have only check the box mentality when it comes for security and compliance, because you want to satisfy your customers' requirement. But this is what we also understand inside. This is an actual risk. Just imagine what happens if one day you wake up and you see that someone removed your administrative access from your production environment. That's like you're going to miss a heartbeat at that moment. That's like a nightmare. And in order for that not to happen, you really need to follow this compliance, because these security guidelines and implement controls that are right for you and going to satisfy your customers in order to build trust.
Thank you, Meiran. Well said. Karan, you have quite an interesting initiative nowadays by connecting both worlds, cybersecurity and fintech. Can you maybe share something about that?
Yeah, so just for context, right? So we sit between the banks and fintechs, and part of the job is to make sure that the fintechs are enterprise ready. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest gaps we found was security and compliance and just the enterprise readiness. So we're organically ended up building a cybersecurity marketplace. So this would go for things like API security, cloud security, SOC, all these things that a fintech needs to be security mature in order to work with other scale-ups as well as banks. So that's going live in a month's time, and it's already in beta. There's already a lot of traffic there, but I thought that was the best thing we could do to put a number of solutions that most startups need in order to increase their maturity. Yeah.
Sounds great. You want to say something, Jason?
I'm just going to summarize your question, which was, how does a startup survive in a mature market? And the answer is by being agile. And that's what's happening. A good startup is agile, understands the customer's need, makes it really easy for the customer to deal with them. And if they give us that service, I'd much rather deal with them than the oracles of this world. And the last thing I'd say on this is that Amazon wasn't the first online bookseller. They just got something right. So you've just got to get something right.
Thank you. You yourself, you work with a lot with startups. I know you're part of the CCL syndicate, and you see so many startups, you support so many startups. What is there for you? Because you're a busy man, you are crazy busy, vendors are chasing after you, family, work, 64 acquisitions in the last year?
64, yeah.
64 acquisitions in the last year, but you still find time for cybersecurity startups to sit with them, to mentor them. How do you do that? Like, what is it for you? What do you gain from that?
So it's not the money, I can tell you that. It's when you see that people do things wrong, you think it was so easy for you to do it right. If you'd only do this or only do that, or people come up with you with great ideas and they're so blinded by their ideas that they don't take advice. And sometimes my advice wouldn't be right, and our advice may not be right, but at least be open to the advice. So I just wanted to be in the field and be able to give some feedback after years of experience.
Thank you, Jason. Vlad.
Can you repeat the question?
Of course.
Yeah.
You see many startups. You work you work with many startups. You help many startups as a mentor, as a friend. How do you find time for that? And what type of satisfaction do you gain out of that?
Well, I'd say it's always good to broaden your horizons, not to again end up in this vacuum where you think that's only where you've been fixated to this certain vision and you don't see what any industry progress or so. So it's definitely very beneficial from this point. Also, it's always good just as an idea sourcing. So just to see, what's around, to see how the industry moves, even to be a bit more predictive in certain trends and in in your strategy vision and strategy shaping in this sense. And I generally like the idea of curation. And with startups, again, I'm saying this is important. Not just to go to some conference or to Google and I want to buy cybersecurity startup service, right? It doesn't work. You need to actually select it from some sort of curated assortment, and because that reduces the chances of the startup being isolated from reality, or being, not being very mature, or very much not product based but marketing based. So curation is important, and by mentoring and by helping, that's you help to curate it. You help to for these technologies to adopt those constructive shapes, which can actually do a good purpose in the corporate.
Thank you so much, Vlad. We have time for one more. Karan, maybe you'll be the last one. Entrepreneur, CTO, working with many startups. What is it for you?
Why did I go from CTO to being an entrepreneur? Is that? It wasn't for longer hours and less pay. I think if you become an entrepreneur, you're really passionate about the product you're building. And the product we're building, which is connecting incumbents to the startup scene, is really driven by my experience when I was a CTO, and it's just really hard to consume smaller companies as banks and capability. So that's where it comes from. It's actually how we work with the fintech ecosystem and the cybersecurity ecosystem is what drives me.
Thank you so much for that, for these words. And I want to thank you all for this panel. I thank you for your time, and thank you for our audience. So we'll be here after the panel. If you want to ask something, say something, we're here. Feel free to get in touch with us. And once again, thank you, Financial Magnets, for having us here. All the best and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.